Before this story begins, let me ask you one simple question. Have you ever judged someone within just a few seconds, only to realize later that you were completely wrong? What you're about to hear is an unforgettable story that starts with a wealthy black businessman walking into a luxury hotel, only to be told he doesn't belong there. But what happened next left an entire board of executives speechless and changed the future of the company forever. This isn't just a story about prejudice. It's a powerful reminder that true character can never be measured by appearance, status, or first impressions. Stay with us until the end, because the final lesson may change the way you see people for the rest of your life. People rarely reveal who they are when they hold power. They reveal who they are when they think someone has none. The sentence drifted through the marble lobby almost like an invisible warning, though no one seemed to notice it yet. Morning sunlight poured through the towering glass walls of the Grand Crescent Hotel in downtown Chicago, painting long golden reflections across polished stone floors where executives, international travelers, and luxury guests moved with practiced confidence. Every detail inside the building spoke the language of success. Crystal chandeliers shimmered overhead. Fresh white orchids decorated the reception counters. A grand piano rested beneath a sweeping staircase, its soft melody blending with the quiet conversations of guests checking into one of the city's most prestigious hotels. Near the revolving entrance, Victoria Hayes adjusted the sleeve of her elegant cream-colored business suit before glancing across the lobby with the calm precision that had made her one of the youngest operations directors in the company's history. She believed excellence could be recognized from across a room. Expensive watches, tailored clothing, perfect posture, confident introductions. In her experience, appearances rarely lied. At least that was what she had convinced herself after 15 years of climbing every step of the corporate ladder. This morning carried unusual importance. The hotel's owner had instructed every department to prepare for the arrival of a confidential investor whose identity had been shared with only a handful of senior executives. Rumors floated quietly between employees. Some believed the visitor represented a billion-dollar hospitality fund from New York. Others whispered about an international corporation looking to acquire luxury properties across the country. No one knew for certain. Victoria intended to make sure everything looked flawless before the mysterious guest arrived. Her eyes moved carefully across the lobby until they settled on a man stepping through the revolving doors. He appeared to be around 40 years old, a black man with calm eyes and an effortless confidence that somehow made him stand out. Without demanding attention, his black suit was simple, impeccably tailored, and absent of flashy accessories. A dark overcoat rested neatly across one arm, while a slim leather portfolio remained tucked beneath the other. His polished shoes reflected the morning light with every measured step toward the reception area. He neither hurried nor hesitated. Instead, he walked with the quiet certainty of someone completely comfortable wherever he happened to be. Victoria frowned almost instinctively. She searched for a hotel identification badge, a conference lanyard, or any indication that he belonged to one of the scheduled executive meetings. She found none. Before the receptionist could greet him, Victoria crossed the marble floor with controlled confidence and offered the kind of professional smile that never quite reached her eyes. "Excuse me, sir," she said politely enough for nearby guests to hear. Deliveries, maintenance personnel, and service contractors are asked to use the employee entrance behind the building. The back door is around the corner. The lobby seemed to grow strangely quieter. The man looked at her for several seconds, not with offense or embarrassment, but with genuine curiosity, as though trying to understand why she had reached that conclusion so quickly. His expression remained remarkably calm. "I appreciate the directions," he answered in an even voice. "But I have a meeting upstairs." Victoria's smile became thinner. "The executive floors are private. If you're here for work, someone from facilities can assist you through the proper entrance." Around them, a few guests slowed their pace. A concierge glanced up from arranging luggage carts. Two young associates carrying presentation folders exchanged uncertain looks before continuing toward the elevators. The man never raised his voice. He simply studied the gold nameplate clipped neatly to Victoria's blazer. Operations Director, Victoria Hayes. A faint smile appeared for only a moment before disappearing again. "Thank you, Ms. Hayes," he said gently. "I'll remember your name." Something about the sentence unsettled her in a way she couldn't explain. It carried no threat, no sarcasm, and no visible frustration. It sounded almost respectful, yet it lingered in the air long after he finished speaking. Without another word, he adjusted the leather portfolio beneath his arm and calmly turned away from the employee entrance she had indicated. Instead, he began walking toward the private elevator reserved exclusively for ownership, board members, and the highest-ranking executives. Victoria's composure cracked for the first time that morning. "Sir," she called firmly as several heads turned toward them, "that elevator is restricted." The man continued walking with the same measured pace, his reflection stretching across the polished marble floor beneath the warm morning light, while somewhere far above, an executive conference room remained unusually quiet. Every member of the board unknowingly waiting for one guest who had not yet arrived. The executive assistant stopped only a few feet from the reception desk, taking one steady breath before scanning every face in the lobby. His tailored navy suit contrasted sharply with the urgency written across his expression. Several employees instinctively stepped aside, recognizing him as Jonathan Pierce, the chairman's chief assistant, a man rarely seen outside the executive floors unless something required immediate attention. His eyes moved quickly across the crowd until they landed on Marcus Reed. The tension disappeared from his face so suddenly that it caught everyone by surprise. "Mr. Reed," Jonathan said with visible relief, extending his hand respectfully. "We have been looking for you everywhere. The chairman asked me to bring you upstairs immediately. Everyone is waiting." The lobby became remarkably still. The receptionist lowered the tablet she had been holding. The concierge slowly released the handle of a luggage cart without realizing it. Victoria felt the confidence she had carried all morning begin to slip away, though she refused to let it show. She looked from Jonathan to Marcus, searching for some explanation that would restore the certainty she had possessed only moments earlier. "There must be some mistake," she said carefully. "This gentleman does not appear on our executive arrival list." Jonathan turned toward her politely. "That is because Mr. Reed requested complete confidentiality. His visit was intentionally removed from the standard schedule. Only the chairman and the board were provided with the final authorization." Victoria blinked once. "Confidential?" Jonathan nodded. "Yes. We were instructed not to announce his arrival to anyone outside executive leadership." Marcus remained silent, neither correcting anyone nor displaying satisfaction. His calm demeanor remained exactly as it had been since entering the building. Jonathan looked apologetically toward him. "I sincerely apologize for the delay, sir. The board meeting was scheduled to begin 20 minutes ago, but the chairman refused to proceed without you." Marcus offered a reassuring smile. "These things happen." The simplicity of his response somehow made Victoria feel even smaller. He had every opportunity to embarrass her in front of guests and employees. Instead, he acted as though the misunderstanding mattered less than the people involved. Jonathan gestured respectfully toward the private elevator. "Whenever you are ready, sir." Marcus glanced briefly toward Victoria before speaking. Ms. Hayes was simply following the procedures she believed were appropriate. Jonathan acknowledged the comment with a quiet nod. Understood. Yet his expression suggested he also understood there was more to the story than procedures alone. As the elevator doors opened with a soft chime, polished stainless steel reflected the morning sunlight flooding through the glass walls. Marcus stepped inside with the same measured confidence that had characterized every movement since his arrival. Jonathan followed beside him. Just before the doors closed, Marcus turned once more toward Victoria. "I hope the rest of your morning goes well," he said sincerely. There was no bitterness, no triumph, no hidden insult, only genuine courtesy. The elevator doors closed silently, carrying both men toward the executive floors. For several long seconds, no one in the lobby spoke. Victoria remained standing exactly where she was, staring at the closed elevator as though expecting it to reopen and somehow reverse what had just happened. Instead, the display above the doors quietly counted upward. 22nd floor, 23rd, 24th. Each number felt heavier than the last. Around her, hotel operations gradually resumed, although not quite with their previous rhythm. Employees returned to their responsibilities, but conversations became softer. Several associates avoided looking directly at Victoria. Others exchanged thoughtful glances before continuing with their work. Nobody criticized her. Nobody whispered loudly enough to be heard. The silence itself became impossible to ignore. Victoria slowly lowered her hands to her sides. She replayed every sentence she had spoken since Marcus entered the building. She had never asked what meeting he was attending before making assumptions. She had never considered that confidence could appear without expensive displays of status. Most painfully of all, she remembered the calm way he had thanked her for directions she never should have given. Several floors above, the elevator doors opened into an executive corridor lined with original artwork and floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Lake Michigan. Board members waiting outside the conference room immediately stood as Marcus stepped forward. The chairman himself crossed the room with an unmistakable smile, extending both hands in welcome. "Marcus," he said warmly, "we have all been looking forward to seeing you. Thank you for coming." Marcus returned the handshake with quiet professionalism before looking through the expansive windows at the city stretching beneath the morning sun. Somewhere far below, the elegant hotel lobby looked impossibly small, while a single decision made in less than a minute had already begun changing far more than anyone downstairs yet understood. Inside the executive conference room, the atmosphere shifted the moment Marcus Reed took his seat. No one hurried him. No one interrupted him. The chairman simply smiled and closed the presentation folder that had remained untouched for nearly half an hour. Around the handcrafted walnut table sat 11 board members, each representing decades of experience in hospitality, finance, and commercial real estate. Every pair of eyes rested on Marcus with unmistakable respect. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, the Chicago skyline stretched beneath a brilliant blue morning sky, while sunlight reflected across Lake Michigan like polished silver. The chairman folded his hands before speaking. "Thank you for making the trip, Marcus. I know your schedule has been exceptionally demanding." Marcus offered a modest smile. "The opportunity deserved my full attention." Across the table, several executives nodded. They knew his reputation well. Marcus had built a career by investing quietly, avoiding publicity, and allowing successful businesses to speak for themselves. While others chased headlines, he studied people. While competitors measured quarterly profits, he measured long-term character. That philosophy had transformed struggling companies into respected institutions across the country. The chairman activated a large display showing architectural renderings of future hotel renovations, financial forecasts, employee retention reports, and guest satisfaction trends collected over the previous 5 years. "Everything we discuss today depends on one question," he said. "Can this company continue growing without losing the values that built its reputation?" Marcus remained silent while carefully reviewing every page placed before him. He never rushed. Occasionally, he made brief notes in the margin of a report before turning another page. His calm concentration contrasted sharply with the nervous anticipation visible throughout the room. Meanwhile, 26 floors below, Victoria Hayes attempted to return to her morning responsibilities, but nothing felt familiar anymore. She answered questions from department managers, approved housekeeping schedules, and reviewed catering requests, yet her thoughts repeatedly returned to the quiet man she had stopped only minutes earlier. Every detail replayed with uncomfortable clarity. His steady voice, his patient expression, the absence of anger. Most unsettling of all was the realization that she had reached a conclusion about him before asking even the simplest question. She walked toward the reception desk, where Emily, one of the senior guest service associates, was organizing reservation files. "Did you know who he was?" Victoria asked quietly. Emily hesitated before answering. "No, ma'am. I only knew Mr. Pierce never comes downstairs unless the chairman personally sends him." Victoria nodded slowly. "Did anyone else recognize him?" Emily shook her head. "Not until Mr. Pierce arrived." Victoria thanked her and continued walking through the lobby, but every polished surface now reflected more than elegant surroundings. They reflected uncomfortable self-examination. She had spent years teaching employees never to judge guests carelessly. Yet when faced with someone who did not match the image she expected, she had done exactly that herself. Upstairs, the meeting continued as Marcus reached the final page of the executive summary. He closed the folder gently before looking around the room. "Your financial performance is impressive," he said. "Your properties are beautiful. Your expansion strategy is disciplined." Several executives exchanged relieved smiles. Then Marcus continued, "But financial reports only tell part of the story. The room became completely still. Luxury hospitality is not measured only by marble floors, elegant architecture, or five-star amenities. It is measured by how people are treated during ordinary moments when nobody believes an important person is watching. No one interrupted him. The chairman leaned back thoughtfully, already sensing there was more behind those words than a general observation. Marcus rested both hands calmly on the conference table. This morning I experienced one of those ordinary moments. Several board members looked toward one another with growing curiosity. The chairman noticed the subtle change in Marcus's expression. It was neither accusatory nor emotional. It carried the calm honesty of someone describing facts rather than seeking blame. Downstairs, Victoria stood near the towering lobby windows watching guests arrive through the revolving doors. For the first time in many years, she found herself wondering how many stories she had never bothered to discover simply because appearances had seemed convincing. Enough. Outside, another black sedan quietly stopped beneath the hotel entrance canopy. A bell attendant immediately stepped forward with a welcoming smile, opened the front door without hesitation, and greeted the arriving guests with genuine warmth. Victoria watched the simple interaction for several long seconds before lowering her eyes. The lesson had already begun, although she still had no idea that the conversation taking place 26 floors above would soon determine not only the future of the hotel, but also the future of her own career. The chairman allowed several seconds of silence to settle over the conference room before speaking again. "Marcus," he said gently, "would you be willing to share what happened?" Every executive remained perfectly still. Some folded their hands. Others quietly closed their laptops. Nobody reached for a phone or interrupted the moment. Marcus glanced once toward the city beyond the windows before returning his attention to the room. "Nothing extraordinary happened," he began. "At least, not at first. I entered the hotel through the front entrance like any other guest. Before I reached the reception desk, I was politely informed that I should use another entrance." Several board members exchanged confused looks. One executive frowned. "Another entrance?" Marcus nodded. "The employee entrance behind the building." The room fell silent again. No one laughed. No one questioned his account. The chairman slowly removed his glasses and placed them on the polished table. "Were you recognized?" Marcus answered honestly. "No, and that was never the problem." The chairman leaned forward slightly. "Then what was?" Marcus rested both hands on the conference table. "The problem was not that someone failed to recognize me. I do not expect strangers to know my name. The problem is that a conclusion was reached before a conversation ever began." His words landed softly, yet they carried unusual weight. No one asked why I had come. No one asked whether I had an appointment. No one asked a single question before deciding which door I belonged to. Across the room, one board member quietly lowered his eyes. Another slowly closed a financial report that no longer seemed important. Marcus continued with the same calm voice that had never once risen above ordinary conversation. "Every guest enters a hotel carrying a story nobody else can see. Some celebrate milestones. Some attend difficult meetings. Some arrive exhausted after traveling across the country. Some simply hope to be treated with dignity for a few moments before continuing their day. Hospitality begins long before anyone receives a room key." The chairman exhaled slowly. "You are absolutely right." Marcus offered a respectful nod. "I am not sharing this because I was offended. I have experienced assumptions before. They do not define me. What concerns me is something much larger. If this happened to me, someone with the confidence to remain calm, how many ordinary guests leave this building every year believing they were never truly welcome?" The question settled heavily across the room. No executive attempted to answer because every one of them understood the implication. Luxury could be renovated. Marketing campaigns could be redesigned. Profit margins could recover. Trust, once lost, rarely returns so easily. Downstairs, Victoria sat alone inside her office overlooking the lobby. The reports on her desk remained untouched. Through the glass walls, she watched employees greeting arriving guests with practiced professionalism. Yet every smile reminded her of the conversation she had replayed repeatedly inside her own mind. There had been no disrespect in Marcus's voice, no attempt to embarrass her. Somehow that kindness made the memory more difficult to escape. A quiet knock interrupted her thoughts. Emily stepped inside carrying a small folder. "Excuse me, Miss Hayes." Mr. Pierce called from upstairs. Victoria immediately stood. What did he say? Emily hesitated before answering. The executive meeting is still in progress. He asked that you remain available this afternoon in case the chairman wishes to speak with you. Victoria thanked her softly. After the door closed, she remained standing beside the window. She understood enough about executive meetings to recognize what those words probably meant. Somewhere above her, the morning's events were no longer a private misunderstanding. They had become part of a conversation involving the future leadership of the entire company. Back in the conference room, the chairman looked around the table before speaking firmly. Ladies and gentlemen, every renovation plan, every expansion proposal, and every financial projection we discuss today becomes meaningless if we fail the first human interaction that defines our business. No one disagreed. Marcus quietly closed the final folder before him. Buildings create first impressions, he said. People create lasting ones. The chairman nodded with quiet conviction. Then perhaps our most important investment today is not another property. He paused before finishing the sentence. Perhaps it is the culture inside the ones we already own. Around the table, every executive understood that the meeting had just changed direction, and somewhere 26 floors below, Victoria unknowingly waited for a conversation that would challenge everything she had believed about leadership, professionalism, and the true meaning of welcoming another human being through the front door. Late afternoon sunlight stretched across the executive floor, softening the sharp lines of polished wood, brushed steel, and floor-to-ceiling glass. The formal meeting had ended nearly 20 minutes earlier, yet no one seemed eager to leave. Several board members remained quietly discussing Marcus Reed's observations while others stood beside the windows overlooking Chicago, unusually thoughtful for executives accustomed to making rapid decisions worth millions of dollars. The chairman finally closed his notebook and looked toward Jonathan Pierce. Please ask Ms. Hayes to join us when she arrives. Make certain she understands this is a conversation, not a disciplinary hearing. Jonathan nodded and quietly left the conference room. Marcus remained seated, turning a fountain pen slowly between his fingers before placing it carefully beside the leather portfolio he had carried into the hotel that morning. He did not appear satisfied by what had happened downstairs. If anything, he seemed reflective. One of the senior board members finally broke the silence. Most investors would have demanded immediate consequences. Marcus offered a small smile. Consequences can correct behavior. Understanding changes it. The executive considered those words for several seconds before nodding slowly. Downstairs, Victoria Hayes stood alone inside the operations office after receiving Jonathan's message requesting her presence on the executive floor. She looked through the glass wall toward the lobby one more time. Guests continued arriving beneath the revolving doors while employees greeted them with warm professionalism. Everything looked exactly as it had every other morning, yet nothing felt the same. She removed her employee badge from her blazer for a moment, studying the engraved name before fastening it again with steady hands. During 15 years in hospitality, she had believed leadership meant maintaining standards, protecting procedures, and preventing mistakes before they happened. Now she questioned whether she had confused efficiency with fairness. Her office suddenly felt much quieter than usual. She remembered her first day in the hotel industry, working the front desk, while an experienced manager reminded every new employee of one simple principle. Every guest should leave feeling respected, whether they reserved the largest suite or simply stopped inside to ask for directions. Somewhere along the way, promotions, performance reviews, and constant pressure to maintain perfection had slowly replaced that lesson with assumptions she had never noticed forming. She took one slow breath before walking toward the private elevator. Each step across the marble floor echoed softly through the nearly silent corridor. Employees greeted her politely as she passed, unaware of the conversation waiting upstairs. Inside the elevator, the rising floor numbers reflected across polished stainless steel. 20, 21, 22. Victoria watched each number illuminate while memories replayed with uncomfortable precision. She heard her own voice directing Marcus toward the employee entrance. She remembered his calm expression. She remembered the gentle way he had thanked her despite the situation. The elevator stopped on the executive level with a quiet chime. Jonathan Pierce waited just outside the doors. His expression remained professional but reassuring. "Thank you for coming so quickly, Ms. Hayes." Victoria nodded. I assume the chairman wishes to discuss this morning. Jonathan answered honestly. Yes, but before you go inside, there is something you should know. She looked at him carefully. Mr. Reed specifically asked that no one be blamed before everyone had an opportunity to speak. Victoria stared at him in disbelief. He said that. Jonathan nodded. More than once. For the first time that day, genuine emotion crossed Victoria's face. Not fear. Not embarrassment. Gratitude mixed with regret. She lowered her eyes for a brief moment before asking quietly, "Why would he do that?" Jonathan looked toward the conference room doors before answering. Because he believes character is revealed by what people become after recognizing a mistake, not merely by the mistake itself. Those words settled deeply inside her. She suddenly realized Marcus had protected her reputation at every opportunity. He had never corrected her publicly in the lobby. He had never embarrassed her before employees or guests. Even inside the board meeting, he had described the experience without mentioning her name until absolutely necessary. Jonathan gently opened the conference room doors. Warm afternoon sunlight filled the spacious room, casting long reflections across the walnut table where the chairman and every board member remained seated. Marcus stood as Victoria entered. Their eyes met for only a moment. But in that quiet exchange she saw no resentment, no desire to humiliate her, and no satisfaction at the position she now occupied. She saw only calm patience. Somehow, that simple kindness felt heavier than any criticism she had imagined during the long ride upstairs. Victoria Hayes stopped beside the conference table without taking her usual position of confidence. For the first time in many years, she felt uncertain inside a room where she normally knew exactly what to say. The chairman gestured toward an empty chair, but she remained standing. "If it is all right," she said quietly, "I would rather stand." The chairman nodded with understanding. The room remained completely silent. No one seemed interested in rushing the conversation. Marcus Reed looked at her with the same calm expression he had carried since arriving that morning. There was no trace of resentment in his face, only patient attention. Victoria drew one slow breath before speaking. "Mr. Reed, I owe you an apology." She paused briefly, searching for words that sounded honest instead of rehearsed. "When you entered the hotel this morning, I believed I was protecting our standards. Looking back now, I understand that I was protecting assumptions instead." No one interrupted. She continued, her voice steady despite the emotion behind it. "I never asked your purpose for being here. I never asked whether you had an appointment. I looked at you, decided where I thought you belonged, and acted on that decision before giving you the opportunity to tell your own story. That was wrong." Marcus listened without moving. The chairman folded his hands quietly while the other executives watched with complete attention. Victoria lowered her eyes for a moment before continuing. "What troubles me most is not that I made a mistake. It is realizing that I never noticed I had developed the habit of making that kind of judgment at all. Somewhere over the years I became so focused on protecting the image of this hotel that I forgot the image guests carry home is created by how we treat them during their very first conversation." The room remained silent long after she finished speaking. Finally, Marcus stood and walked slowly toward the windows overlooking the city. Warm afternoon light reflected across the glass as he looked down at the streets below. "May I ask you a question?" he said gently. Victoria nodded immediately. "Of course." Marcus turned back toward her. "When you first started working in hospitality, why did you choose this profession?" The question surprised her. She had expected criticism, perhaps difficult questions about policy or accountability. Instead, she found herself thinking about memories she had not visited in years. A small smile appeared, before quickly fading into quiet reflection. "My father owned a neighborhood diner," she answered softly. "Nothing luxurious. Just a family restaurant outside Milwaukee. He used to tell me that people rarely remembered the menu as much as they remembered how someone made them feel when they walked through the door. I believed that for a long time." Marcus nodded. "Do you still believe it?" Victoria hesitated. The answer came almost as a whisper. "I want to." Marcus smiled warmly. "Then perhaps you have not lost that lesson. Perhaps it has simply been buried beneath responsibilities, deadlines, inspections, and expectations." Several board members exchanged thoughtful glances. The chairman quietly leaned back, allowing the conversation to continue naturally. Marcus folded his hands behind his back. "This morning was not the first time someone underestimated me, and it will probably not be the last. But every experience like that gives two people an opportunity. One person decides whether bitterness becomes part of their future. The other decides whether growth becomes part of theirs. Victoria looked directly at him. You could have embarrassed me in front of everyone downstairs. Marcus answered with complete sincerity. That would not have solved the real problem. You could have asked for my position. Perhaps, he replied. But replacing one employee does not automatically change a culture. The chairman smiled quietly. That is exactly why we wanted Marcus as our strategic partner. Several executives nodded in agreement. One senior board member finally spoke. Mr. Reed has spent years investing in organizations that value people as much as performance. That is one reason this partnership matters. Marcus looked around the room before returning his attention to Victoria. Every company eventually becomes a reflection of what its leaders consistently reward. If people only believe appearances matter, they will begin judging appearances. If they believe dignity matters, they will begin protecting dignity. Victoria felt tears gathering in her eyes, though her voice remained composed. Thank you for giving me the chance to understand instead of simply punishing me. Marcus offered a gentle smile. Understanding lasts much longer than embarrassment. In that moment, the atmosphere inside the conference room changed completely. What had begun as a difficult conversation slowly became something far more meaningful. It was no longer about one mistake made in a hotel lobby. It had become a conversation about leadership, humility, and the quiet courage required to admit that true professionalism always begins with seeing the person before seeing the position. The chairman slowly rose from his chair and looked around the conference room before resting both hands lightly against the polished walnut table. The afternoon sun had begun lowering across the Chicago skyline, filling the room with warm amber light that softened every sharp edge. I believe we have discussed policies, investments, and financial projections long enough, he said calmly. Now we must decide what kind of company we want to become. Every executive remained attentive. No one reached for a notebook because they sensed this conversation would be remembered long after quarterly reports had been forgotten. The chairman turned toward Victoria Hayes. You have served this company with dedication for many years. No one questions your work ethic or your commitment. But leadership is measured not only by efficiency. It is measured by the example others choose to follow. Victoria nodded quietly. I understand. He continued with the same steady voice. Before this morning, I was prepared to announce your promotion to Regional Operations Vice President next month. Several executives exchanged brief glances, knowing the decision had already been approved weeks earlier. Victoria looked genuinely surprised. She had hoped for the promotion but had never known the final decision had already been made. The chairman paused before continuing. After today's events, I considered postponing that announcement. The room became completely silent. Victoria accepted the words without argument. That would be understandable, she replied honestly. Trust must be earned every day. Marcus watched the exchange without speaking. He noticed that Victoria no longer defended herself or searched for excuses. Instead, she accepted responsibility with quiet dignity. That difference mattered far more to him than the mistake itself. The chairman looked toward Marcus. As our future strategic partner, your opinion carries significant weight. I would value your perspective. Every eye in the room turned toward Marcus Reed. He remained thoughtful for several moments before answering. When I evaluate a company, I study two different qualities. The first is competence. The second is character. Competence explains how people succeed. Character explains what they do after they fail. The room remained perfectly still. Marcus continued. This morning I witnessed a mistake. This afternoon I witnessed accountability. Those are not the same thing. Victoria looked at him with quiet disbelief. Marcus smiled gently before continuing. If someone refuses to learn, they become a risk to every organization. If someone is willing to confront an uncomfortable truth about themselves, they often become one of its strongest leaders. One board member leaned forward with genuine curiosity. Are you saying today's events should not affect her future? Marcus slowly shook his head. I am saying today's response should affect it just as much as today's mistake. The chairman listened carefully before asking, Then what would you recommend? Marcus folded his hands comfortably in front of him. Keep the promotion exactly where it belongs, but let it represent something different. Let everyone in this company understand that leadership is not reserved for people who never make mistakes. Leadership belongs to people willing to grow beyond them. A quiet sense of relief spread across the room. Victoria lowered her eyes for a brief moment, visibly moved by the unexpected trust being placed in her. "I do not know how to thank you," she said softly. Marcus answered with characteristic humility. "You do not need to thank me. Simply become the leader you remembered a few minutes ago when you spoke about your father's diner." Those words reached her more deeply than any formal recognition could have. She smiled through grateful emotion and nodded. "I will." The chairman looked around the table once more. "Then I believe we have our decision." Every board member nodded in agreement. No formal vote was necessary. The direction had become obvious to everyone present. The chairman extended his hand toward Marcus. "Welcome to the future of this company." Marcus accepted the handshake with quiet confidence. "I look forward to building it together." As the meeting concluded, executives slowly gathered their folders and laptops, but no one hurried toward the door. The atmosphere felt noticeably different from only a few hours earlier. Instead of discussing acquisition strategies, several board members quietly spoke about employee training, guest experience, and ways to strengthen a culture built on dignity rather than assumptions. Victoria remained near the conference room windows for a final moment, watching the evening sunlight reflect across Lake Michigan. Earlier that morning, she had believed success depended upon protecting the image of the hotel. Now she understood that its true reputation would always be shaped by thousands of ordinary moments when someone unknown walked through the front entrance hoping to be welcomed with simple respect. She silently promised herself that beginning tomorrow, every one of those moments would matter. 3 months passed, and the Grand Crescent Hotel no longer felt exactly the same. The marble floors still reflected the morning sunlight. The crystal chandeliers still illuminated the elegant lobby every evening. Guests still arrived from every corner of the country carrying designer luggage, business portfolios, wedding flowers, and family vacation plans. Yet beneath the familiar luxury, something far more meaningful had quietly changed. New employee orientation no longer began with occupancy targets or service rankings. Instead, every new team member heard a simple sentence displayed on the first page of the training guide. "Every person who walks through our front door deserves the same respect before we know anything about their story." The words had not come from a marketing agency or an expensive consultant. They had grown from one ordinary morning that nearly everyone in the company now understood without needing every detail explained. Victoria Hayes stood near the entrance shortly after sunrise, greeting guests personally before beginning her executive meetings. Her promotion to Regional Operations Vice President had taken effect exactly as planned, but those who worked beside her noticed something far more important than a new title. She had become the first person to welcome nervous job applicants, delivery drivers, maintenance contractors, conference speakers, families with small children, elderly couples celebrating anniversaries, and travelers who simply looked tired after long flights. She asked names before assumptions. She listened before deciding. Employees gradually began doing the same. The culture changed one conversation at a time. Across the lobby, Emily smiled while helping an older couple find a nearby pharmacy. A bell attendant knelt briefly to greet a young boy who proudly carried his own small suitcase. A concierge patiently gave directions to a visitor who was not even staying at the hotel. None of those moments appeared in financial reports. Yet somehow they became the strongest measure of success the company had ever achieved. Guest satisfaction reached record levels during the following quarter, but the chairman quietly reminded the board that numbers had simply reflected something deeper. Respect had become visible. On a bright autumn morning, a familiar black sedan stopped beneath the entrance canopy. Marcus Reed stepped out wearing the same understated black suit, carrying the same slim leather portfolio, and walking with the same calm confidence that had defined him from the very beginning. Before he reached the revolving doors, Victoria had already walked forward with a warm smile. "Good morning, Mr. Reed," she said sincerely. "Welcome back." Marcus smiled in return. "Thank you, Miss Hayes. It is good to see you again." Their handshake lasted only a moment, yet it carried none of the tension that had filled their first meeting. It reflected mutual respect earned through honesty rather than position. As they entered the lobby together, Marcus noticed another small moment unfolding nearby. An elderly maintenance technician wearing a simple work uniform approached the front entrance carrying a heavy tool case. Without hesitation, A young employee held the large glass door open for him with the same welcoming smile offered to every guest arriving from the valet entrance. The technician thanked him quietly before continuing inside. Marcus glanced toward Victoria without saying anything. She noticed the scene as well and smiled softly. "We have been practicing," she admitted. Marcus nodded. "I can see that." Upstairs, the chairman welcomed Marcus once again into the executive conference room. This time there was no urgency, no difficult conversation waiting, and no lesson that needed correcting. Instead, there were new expansion plans, employee development programs, and community partnerships designed around one guiding principle: build remarkable hotels by first becoming remarkable people. As the meeting concluded later that afternoon, Marcus paused beside the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. The streets below looked as busy as they had the first morning he arrived, filled with strangers whose stories remained invisible to everyone passing by. The chairman joined him quietly. "Do you think one conversation can really change an organization?" he asked. Marcus looked toward the hotel entrance far below where guests continued arriving beneath the autumn sunlight. "One conversation rarely changes everything," he answered gently. "But one conversation can change one person, and one changed person can influence hundreds of others without ever realizing it." The chairman smiled thoughtfully while the late afternoon light spread across the skyline in shades of gold and amber. Down below, the revolving doors continued turning, welcoming one unfamiliar face after another into the building. No one knew which visitor might become tomorrow's investor, teacher, caregiver, entrepreneur, or lifelong friend. In the end, it no longer mattered. Every door looked exactly the same when it opened with kindness, and every person stepping through it carried a value that could never be measured by appearance, title, wealth, or first impressions. The city slowly welcomed another evening. The lights inside the hotel glowed warmly against the gathering dusk, and somewhere beyond the glass, countless strangers continued writing stories that all deserved the chance to begin with dignity.